It is the biggest day in the history of Liverpool and Manchester. Tens of thousands have gathered to witness an event that will change the world forever. From today, an iron umbilical cord will join together the great twin cities of the Industrial Revolution. Steam and speed. These are the driving forces of their economy. A day in the life of a worker in these parts has already undergone radical change. While most people around the globe are getting up to work in fields, close to 100,000 Lancashire folk are clocking on at factories. There are more machines in this corner of Britain than in the rest of the world put together. One in particular is poised to propel the whole nation into the modern world. Among the many VIPs is the man invited to open the railway, the Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington. He will lead a cortege of trains on the 2-hour journey from Liverpool to Manchester. The most famous of the locomotives is Stephenson's rocket. It seems like a strange beast to the world's first train passengers.
We were introduced to the little engine, which was to drag us along the rails. This snorting little animal, which I felt rather inclined to pat, was then harnessed to our carriage.
This is the popular actress Fanny Kemble, and these are her impressions of her first encounter with the Iron Horse.
She goes upon 2 wheels, which are her feet, and are moved by bright steel legs called pistons. These are propelled by steam. The coals which are its oats were under the bench. The reins, bit and bridle of this wonderful beast is a small steel handle which applies or withdraws steam from its legs.
When the cannon fires to start the cortege, it blows a spectator's eye out. A bad omen on a day of celebration for the new industrial age. This is the starting point for a mystery that continues to puzzle historians. The great conundrum of why the Industrial Revolution began where and when it did. To tackle this problem, a special group of investigators has gathered. They will pool their expertise in history, anthropology, science and economics. This kind of collaboration is unusual. By sharing different approaches, they hope to unravel this fundamental question of history. Not since Neolithic times has there been such a radical change in the daily lives of the human species. Their task is to trace back the roots of the Industrial Revolution.
So one of the puzzles is certainly why England? Why then? Why England? For instance, what about France?
There doesn't, to any intents and purposes, seem to be any reason why you would pick England, especially the Midlands and the northwest of England, over what was called then the great nation, France.
In a series of leaps back in time, they will widen their perspective, eventually linking the rocket's journey to the dawn of agriculture 10,000 years ago. But first, they will take a snapshot of industrial Britain in 1830 and compare it to the other countries around the globe. Simon Schaffer is an historian of science, To understand why the locomotive made its first appearance in Britain, he looks at the technology that made it possible.
The first steam engine was built in Tipton in Staffordshire by an ironmonger called Thomas Newcomen. It was no thoroughbred racer like the Rocket, but a workhorse confined to a shed and used to pump water from mine shafts. To build a stationary steam engine, which you're going to use basically as a pump, you need a cylinder which a piston can run up and down. You need a complicated feedback mechanism so that the motion of the piston can be turned into some kind of useful motion. And you need a boiler which isn't going to blow up and which can generate enough steam at high pressure regularly to run the whole machine. Now, for a piston like that, all the technology that goes into that comes from boring cannon. Think of a cannon as a kind of one-shot engine in which the ball takes the place of the piston and the barrel of the gun takes the place of the cylinder. If the ball is too closely fitted into the barrel, then the barrel will bend or explode. If it's not fitted closely enough, then you're not using enough of the energy developed by the force of the explosion to fire the ball out of the gun. The kind of precision engineering needed to get that balance right is very closely related to the precision engineering needed to make pistons and cylinders and steam engines work. The feedback and control systems, that comes from clockwork. And the boiler is the kind of thing with which brewers and distillers are really familiar. Now, across Europe, there are lots of brewers and distillers, there are lots of clockmakers, and there are lots of people making cannon for the army. But what you get in Britain is people able to pull those together. So the key is system building. Stephenson is more impressive as a systems engineer than as an inventor. He pulls together in a single workable system a whole series of innovations and techniques that lots of different people have generated. So there's a clue to why this happens in England or Britain first.
George Stephenson does not invent the locomotive, but is the first to see its potential as a carrier of people rather than of coal. As a lowly engineman working in a colliery, he takes apart one of Newcomen's engines to find out how it works. 15 years later, he is rich, the first to build trains on an industrial scale. He knows the value of publicity. He deliberately packs his trains with the movers and shakers of the day, and moved and shaken they are.
The engine set off at its utmost speed, 35 miles per hour, swifter than a bird flies. You cannot conceive what the sensation of cutting the air was. I stood up and with my bonnet off drank in the air before me. The wind, which was strong, or perhaps the force of our own thrusting against it, absolutely weighed my eyelids down. When I closed my eyes, this sensation of flying was quite delightful and strange beyond description. Yet strange as it was, I had the perfect sense of security and not the slightest fear.
You can't really have this kind of railway system without hype. And so part of the Stephenson project is this newfangled word, journalism. You get London and Manchester journalists to travel on these trains. You invite media celebrities like Fanny Kemble. You make sure they have a very good time. You make sure George Stephenson, this rather rugged Geordie figure, is there to chat them up. There's a media blitz, partly to attract investors, but also partly to build up a sense not only of excitement, but also security. Nothing went wrong. We didn't fall over. We didn't break our arm. We saw the world in a completely new way. We had all these new experiences, but we came out living at the other end of the story.
However, the driving force behind the railway is not the speedy transportation of people, but the explosive growth of the cotton industry. Until today, the only way of shipping raw cotton to the Manchester mills 30 miles away was by canal. But canals were not to be sound investments much longer.
One reason why the Manchester and Liverpool Railway has to be built, why it's profitable to build it, as a good Manchester man would say, is because the canals between the Mersey and Manchester cannot carry the weight of goods which the cotton trade is generating, both in and out. They get blocked.
It took longer for cotton bales to get from the docks at Liverpool up to Manchester than it took for that cotton to get from the United States across the Atlantic to Liverpool. After the Manchester and Liverpool Railway was built, you could have a businessman in Manchester who went to Liverpool in the morning, bought some cotton, brought it to Manchester, and he could do that 2 or 3 times in one day. What capitalism is doing there, and certainly what merchant and industrial capitalists are doing, is deliberately accelerating the system, because wherever there's a blockage, there's a loss from their point of view. They see time as money. That old 18th century motto is being turned into metal and cotton and human labor power.
In 1830, there is one place where time can only mean money. Now, almost anything you can make by hand, a machine in a factory can make faster. By this time in the morning, a machine operator will have already been working for more than 5 hours and produced 30 yards of cloth. A handloom weaver will only have produced 3 yards.
The trouble with handloom weaving is when you've done 8 hours on an handloom and you're doing a circle for a tie, at the end of 8 hours it's not a circle anymore, it's an oval, because you're getting tired.
And you've lost the
And you won't get paid.
Yeah.
So you've got to bang that in, and after 8 hours, believe me, we're very, very hard work.
So handloom weavers have to be
Oh,
vigilant
what?
even more than machine miners.
Definitely, definitely. That is what I call grafting, real grafting.
Yeah.
This in comparison on machines, you see the machine's doing most of the work for you.
Why was it that this part of Lancashire, where we are standing now, is the first and principal place where you get this kind of automation of the whole cotton industry? What are the big factors here, in your view, that are making that possible?
Climate, you see Lancashire, Yorkshire, well known for quite a heavy rain.
Yeah.
All Lancashire towns are nearly always in the valley, where you get dampness.
Yeah.
In summertime, in mills, when with no humidity,
Yeah.
the first thing you did when you walked in the mill, you used to slosh the floor with buckets of water to get some dampness in,
Right.
else they won't leave.
Right, so we have to imagine a room like this full of, say, 1,000 looms in constant damp.
Yeah.
Constant
Yeah,
moisture.
you needed that dampness
Right.
in the
Because
atmosphere.
otherwise the thread
Won't
breaks.
leave, just breaking all the time.
Yeah.
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 Lancashire has another crucial resource, the men whose capital has built the new cathedrals of industry. Many of them are religious nonconformists, excluded from the establishment because they're not members of the Church of England. They're barred from universities and from the learned professions, so they concentrate their energies on business. Stephenson's daring railway enterprise doesn't frighten them. While others invest in land, they invest in technology.
Today, the trains are full of these new industrial men, many of them shareholders in the railway. They are in the vanguard of a social group unique to Britain, the middle class. Tomorrow, when the regular service begins, the first commuters will be queuing for seats. 7 shillings in first class, 4 shillings in second. The spending power of the middle class is creating the world's first consumer boom. Maxine Berg is an economic historian who has studied the origins of consumerism.
The real trendsetters were to be found amongst the middle classes in the early 19th century. These were the main sources of the new consumption. They did aspire to some of the ways of life of the gentry, certainly. But along with that, there went a sense of, I think, a real self-identity, of aspiring to have things that were not what the gentry would have. So you would have things that were new and modern.
Luxury products that previously only the rich could afford are now within the grasp of the new middle class. These objects of desire, previously handmade and expensive, can now be factory produced. Fabrics no longer have to be laboriously printed by hand. Patterns are etched onto steel rollers, and the printing presses are driven by steam.
Chinaware, earthenware is a wonderful demonstration of all this. The Staffordshire earthenware manufacturers developed techniques for transfer printing instead of hand painting designs onto earthenware so that they can produce colored and patterned chinaware for a polite and cultivated lifestyle. And it was affordable.
In 1830, no other European country has the social mobility that allows a middle class to emerge. The wealth this new class generates is fueling the British economy. For some, there are fortunes to be made. For the majority, on the treadmill of mass production, there is a price to pay. As the rocket steams towards Manchester, it cuts through rural landscape. People who work the fields are suspicious of the new iron horse, with good reason. Machinery has already driven many of them out of their jobs. This very week, farm labourers in southern England are rioting and destroying threshing machines. The unemployed are forced to move from the countryside to look for work in the factories. Now, the boom towns of the industrial age are growing faster than cities have ever done before.
Manchester became a kind of dark tourist attraction during the 1820s and 30s. The population of Liverpool rose by, 40% in 10 years, from 1820 to 1830. Lots of people really did come to look at what was going on.
They recognise that Manchester is their future, that this is the way everywhere is going to become. And that future is both exciting and infernal. It's what's going to happen to us all, and it's hell.
One tourist who has come to see the future is a 22-year-old German, sent to Manchester to work in a branch of his father's textile company. He witnesses at first hand the ugly face of unchecked capitalism.
Wenn man sehen will, wie wenig Raum der Mensch zum Bewegen, wie wenig Luft. If anyone wishes to see in how little space a human being can move, how little air, and such air, he can breathe, it is only necessary to travel hither.
This is Friedrich Engels. His account of working-class conditions in Manchester will form the basis of a new radical ideology, communism.
Everywhere, heaps of debris, refuse and offal, standing pools for gutters, and a stench which alone would make it impossible for a human being in any degree civilized to live in such a district. Often more than one family lives in a single damp cellar, in whose pestilent atmosphere 12 to 16 persons are crowded together. Das ist die Altstadt von Manchester, und wenn ich meine... And upon rereading my account, I have to admit that it is not exaggerated, but not even dark enough to convey the true sense of grit, ruin and uninhabitableness of this district with its 20 to 30,000 inhabitants.
How so many people could survive living in such appalling conditions has been puzzling anthropologist Alan Macfarlane.
One of the great contradictions in history had been that in order to make cities efficient, you had to have lots of people living in them, close by and working together. And this is economically very efficient. But unfortunately, as people congregated together in cities, they started killing each other off, not by fighting, but by disease. They would pollute the water supply with their feces. The viruses and bacteria would spread because people were close together. And so there would be epidemics. You could never get beyond a certain sized city. But suddenly these cities in England fell away from this pattern. Something odd happened. People didn't die of disease in large numbers. For the first time in history, a civilization appeared to have emerged, certainly in the West, which could get round the great barrier to the growth of cities. But it wasn't just England where this happened. It happened in one other place in the world. Great cities of Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto were just as big, and they had been for a long time. And yet again, people didn't die of waterborne diseases. So what was it about the drinking habits of England and Japan which was special? Neither the Japanese nor the English tolerated drinking cold water if they could possibly avoid it. Arigato. So they drank something else. This is what is known in Japan as honorable tea, which was drunk by these two islands in great quantities, England and Japan, tea. Very nice. But what is the link, the actual causal link? Well, at first I thought it must be the boiling of the water. If you boil water for about 5 minutes, you kill off most bacteria in water. But many people didn't boil for 5 minutes, and there are quite a few bacteria which aren't killed. So I wondered whether there was something more than just the boiling of the water that was important. And then I traced the history of tea back, and I discovered that originally everyone had drank tea not because it was a pleasant drink, but the main reason was that it was a herbal remedy. What tea contains is one of the greatest and most powerful forms of antiseptic known to man, which will kill many kinds of bacteria. When it was brought into England, they did all sorts of experiments to see whether it did have something in it. They put frogs' legs into water and found that they putrefied. They put them into tea and found that they didn't putrefy. So every time a Manchester operative went off, exhausted from their work, drank a cup of tea, not only did they then get the strength to work those grueling hours in the factories, but also they were drinking a powerful antibacterial agent which killed in their mouth and in their stomach many of the diseases they would have got from water or any other substance. So tea is a very necessary background feature for the health revolution, without which you can't have urbanization. And so Japan and England could build up huge cities. At the time of the rocket, Japan had the biggest cities in the world. They were highly commercialized, with a highly literate population. Yet there was no sign of an industrial revolution. In fact, if you looked around Japan in September 1830 for anything remotely resembling the rocket, there was nothing. Not just no trains or experiments with trains, there were hardly any machines at all. Everything was done by human labor. And above all, there was one key human invention that was missing. Japan was a wheel-less civilization. One of the great ways of improving human efficiency had been more or less totally abandoned. So in 1830, not only did they not have trains, they didn't have the wheels to run them on. If you've got a very cheap labor force, as you had in Japan, and you've got the mobility of human beings, it's often much more efficient to use human labor rather than wheels. If you can get humans or animals to do it, it's often better than the wheel. So they couldn't see a use for it. They gave it up.
The steam horse being ill-adapted for going up and down hill, the road was kept at a certain level and appeared sometimes to sink below the surface of the earth and sometimes to rise above it. At one place, it was cut through the solid rock, which formed a wall at either side of it, about 60 foot high. You can't imagine how strange it seemed to be journeying on thus, without any visible cause of progress other than the magical machine between these rocky walls.
Stephenson himself was pretty pessimistic about the ability of his new locomotives to go up any incline at all. So what that meant was that the entire landscape had to be changed. Big cuttings had to be made through the hills, and where you had low-lying areas, certainly boggy areas, for example, big causeways had to be built to turn the undulations of the English countryside into a series of geometrical lines. The flat parallel lines that disappear into infinity become a real icon of the railway age. And the men who make that possible, the navvies, who could shift 30 tons of earth a day, 30 tons for each man, turned the whole of England pretty quickly into one big industrial space.
We had now come 15 miles to where the road traversed a wide and deep valley, over which, in order to keep his road level, Stephenson had thrown a magnificent viaduct of 9 arches. It was lovely and wonderful beyond all words.
As well as the 70-foot-high viaduct, navvies had to dig 1.5 miles of tunnel, excavate 13 miles of cutting, and raise 9 miles of embankment. It took 4 years to pave the way for the rocket.
The main effect of the railway on landscape is that the ups and downs of the countryside have to be leveled out. That also has the effect of separating the railway system from the landscape through which it's moving. Instead of this personal engagement with the countryside across which you're riding or through which you're walking or down which you're rowing, the railway system has to be insulated from it. And so the landscape becomes something that you look at while you're traveling, to be sure. But it just stops being an obstacle. You stop engaging with your world. And that becomes very, very quickly a very common image of alienation, of the separation between the way in which industrial people experience the world and the reality of the world itself.
Whilst the engine runs, the people must work. Men, women, and children are yoked together with iron and steam. The animal machine, subject to 1,000 sources of suffering, is chained fast to the iron machine, which knows no suffering and no weariness.
When Dickens and his friends come to Manchester, they see it as a kind of strange jungle with the great steam pumps working day and night in the factories with the fires lighting the windows behind them. Brain-sick elephants, as he says, moving their heads up and down in time to some manic rhythm. Machinery becomes a kind of strange beast, and the human beasts inside seem to be working as though they were machines. People were experiencing their lives as run by the machine. It's not me, it's the rate of the machine that sets how fast I should work.
One machine dominates people's lives more than any other.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
Once you have automatic institutions, factories, workshops, where the most important thing is getting the machines up and running and then production can start, regulating and coordinating the different components of the workforce becomes essential. Clocking on started to dominate the way in which people understood their own labor time. By the early 1800s, in fact, wages were paid by time rates, by the hour and by the minute.
Left, right, left, right, 1, 2.
What I think is happening in Western industrial society is that the whole sense of time gets increasingly internalized, so that when Jules Verne at the end of the 19th century tries to define what being a gentleman, let alone being a worker, is, a gentleman is someone who knows the time without having to consult his watch, because he's completely internalized this mechanical, regular rhythm. And it's that way in which the clock is brought within psychology, within mentality, that I think defines a lot of what time means in the new industrial societies.
This morning, the trains are on time. The new railway, like everything else in industrial society, is synchronized to the clock. But this obsession with measuring time is exclusive to the West. In China, on this day in 1830, people marched to the beat of a different drum. Christopher Cullen is a historian of Chinese science and technology. He's often asked why this inventive country didn't seem to need the mechanical clock. The drum and bell towers in Beijing provide a clue.
Under the emperors, every evening at 7 o'clock, the great drums would beat 108 times and the bells would sound. So in China, time was certainly publicly marked, but there's a subtle difference here between this time and time as it was marked by the public clocks of some of the cities of Europe. For a start, it wasn't during the day that people were told the time by the drums and the bells, it was at night. The drums sounded every 2 hours to mark the 5 night watches, so as to enable the officials to be ready for their dawn audiences, and to enable the watchmen to do their rounds and the guards to change their duties. This was time designed, certainly not for the citizen to time their work. Nobody would be looking at this clock to say, I've just got time to nip down to the shops before I start my shift this afternoon.
Even though the Chinese had been familiar with mechanical clocks for centuries, the idea never left the Forbidden City.
The Kangxi Emperor is fascinated by European mechanical clocks. But that doesn't mean that the clock spreads to the general population. The idea that it was any part of the emperor's duties to actually suggest to them that they should think of using their time according to a new and more efficient system was far from the aims that the Chinese state set itself. What matters with the population is that they should pursue their occupation, which in the case of most people is farming, of course, and that the taxes should be paid. And I think the idea of timing people to the minute would have seemed quite the opposite of the great slogan that's in one of the emperor's halls in the Forbidden City, Wu Wei, don't take any unnecessary action.
In a society where only one person's time mattered, it's hardly surprising that mechanical clocks didn't spread. Any society without this technology is unlikely to have steam engines, railways, and an industrial revolution. Back in Britain, the fastest machine on Earth is about to reveal its dark side.
Halfway between Liverpool and Manchester, the engine stopped to take in a supply of water, and several of the gentlemen jumped out to look about them. They were standing talking in the middle of the road when an engine on the other line was seen coming down upon them like lightning. The most active of those in peril sprang back to their seats, while poor Mr. Huskisson, less active from the effects of age and ill health, was instantaneously prostrated by the fatal machine, which dashed down like a thunderbolt upon him and passed over his leg, smashing and mangling it in the most horrible way.
William Huskisson was the MP for Liverpool. Huskisson stood for a lot of the political and economic forces that were bringing the railway about. His closest political allies were the big ship owners and merchants back in Liverpool. So his death is deeply ironic. One of the architects of the new economic order being destroyed by that economic order's greatest technological achievement. Huskisson was an evangelical. That is to say, if someone died, it was an act of God, and one should take that literally. So behind the railways and behind Huskisson's death, people saw fate and providence. They tended to be rather under-impressed by chance and over-impressed by what God was trying to tell them. There's an enormous debate about whether railways are the kinds of things God wants.
Huskisson's death may look like divine intervention and a warning to put the brakes on technological progress. But the machine has already built up too much momentum for anyone to stop it.
The Duke of Wellington declared his intention not to proceed. However, upon being informed that the whole population of Manchester had turned out and a disappointment might give rise to riots, he consented to go on. The buoyant exhilaration of the morning was past, and all now wore the sombre aspect of a funeral procession.
In Europe, in particular in Western Europe, people come to the realization that in fact the manipulation of the physical world is nothing to be ashamed of, is nothing to feel guilty about. In fact, if you do so, you're only illustrating the glory of the Creator. That the Creator in his infinite wisdom has created something and put us in the middle of it. And he put it at our disposal.
Joel Mokyr believes that in order for a society to industrialize, it must have a particular attitude to the natural world.
Our technological success is in large part due to the fact that we believe that this entire physical environment is ours. We can do with it whatever we want, and we can manipulate it for our own benefit. So if we don't like the virus that causes smallpox, we eradicate it. And if we like whales, when we keep them alive. But we do this for us. We don't do this for the whales, really. We do this for us. We are the center of the universe. I think that is really a necessary condition for any kind of technological advances to be self-sustaining. Because if you don't have that, at some point you're going to sit down, you're going to say, all right, what we have achieved until now is fine, but we shouldn't press it, we shouldn't push it any further, we should live in harmony with nature. We don't want to live in harmony with nature. We want to keep disrupting it. That is the Western way of doing things. That is why we are rich and everybody else is not. Because if you're going to live in harmony with nature, you may be happy, but you're going to be poor.
Although Manchester is prosperous, its working population is far from happy. Most spectators have not come to cheer.
The vast concourse of people who had assembled to witness the triumphant arrival was of the lowest order of mechanics and artisans, among whom a dangerous spirit of discontent with the government prevailed. Groans and hisses greeted the carriage in which the Duke of Wellington sat. High above the grim and grimy crowd of scowling faces, a loom had been erected, at which sat a tattered, starved-looking weaver, evidently set there as a representative man, to protest against this triumph of machinery. The contrast between our departure from Liverpool and our arrival at Manchester was one of the most striking things I've witnessed.
2 months before the rocket ran from Liverpool to Manchester, the French king had been overthrown in a very dramatic and fairly violent revolution. France haunted the English imagination, and what France stood for was political revolution. So the Republican tricolour was very often used to stand for a kind of two-finger salute to the Tory government. And that's exactly what happens as the rocket pulls into Manchester, where the handloom weavers hang out the French flag of revolution. And in front of the flag is the representative man, as Fanny Kemble calls him, a handloom weaver sitting at his loom. These were the people who'd been completely dispossessed and expropriated by rapid industrialization. Most observers, both within the working class and the journalists who are describing what's going on, reckon that it's extremely likely that there will be a mass revolution within Britain within anyone's lifetime.
There was no revolution. People learned to live with the machine. The rocket became an icon of the new industrial age. A different kind of revolution, the Industrial Revolution, went on to spread throughout the world. But what were the links in the chain of events that allowed this to happen? Why was Britain undergoing these changes and not its nearest neighbors, France and Germany? To answer these questions, the investigation will take its first leap back in time and look at the 100 years that led up to the day the world took off.